It's an honor to be here. This was one of the places I came to do research for my book, Beach to Bluegrass, here at Douglas MacArthur. And I wanted to share with you some stories tonight about a road that has been tied to a lot of interesting points in history. Highway 58. Now, this is the cover of my book called Beach to Bluegrass about Highway 58. Highway 58 stretches for 507 miles just above the North Carolina line and the Tennessee border. 507 miles from east to west. Until 1996, when the Cumberland Gap Tunnel was built, this was the longest U.S. highway to be self-contained within one state. It keeps going and going and going, and it doesn't go over that border of Virginia until the very last tip. 0.4 of a mile, it goes into Tennessee. The rest of, and then it ends. The rest of it is completely within Virginia. Here we are right about the middle of Highway 58. This is the 4-lane section around, just approaching the Blue Ridge Mountains in the Martinsville area. So here we've got a wonderful, wonderful stretch of highway, and the speed limits when you go on some of these bypasses are up to 70 miles an hour. This is where we get to the end. This gap right here is the Cumberland Gap, and you see how it just kind of dives down. And this is where Daniel Boone marched out to the west. And of course, a lot of people have been out there before him, but he had been hired to build a road on out to the west to reach Kentucky's bluegrass, which is why the name of the book was called Beach to Bluegrass. My dad, who grew up in Smithfield and Rescue area, Richard Tennis, my daddy, had come up with the title Beach to Bluegrass because I said I was writing about going from Virginia Beach to the Cumberland Gap National Historical Park. And the Cumberland Gap National Historical Park is the gateway to Kentucky. This is what you see when you get beyond Highway 58. And in fact, in the upper left side of this screen is where the road is kind of veering off and stopping, and it's going to merge on into 25 right in there. This is actually standing on the Pinnacle Rock at the Cumberland Gap National Historical Park, and we are looking into Cumberland Gap, Tennessee, which is not inside of Virginia. Of course, it's Cumberland Gap, Tennessee. We are, at this point, we are not yet beyond the farthest point of Virginia. That's over there to the right. Virginia actually ends over on that mountain over there on the right. This is where the road begins. It begins in two different places, and we have statues at both places. Neither one of them really have anything to do with Highway 58. But this is where the road begins on 17th Street with the statue of John Waring in Virginia Beach. He was a muscle man. He could hold back motorcycles with his teeth. If you might remember, when I went to school at Kempsville High School in the 80s, I remember in Kempsville Junior High, I had a gym teacher who had a Waring's gym shirt on. So that's how I remember John Waring. Of course, now we have the statue of him next to the Dairy Queen on 17th Street. We also have this guy in the other part of Highway 58 where it begins at 31st Street. This is the other Highway 58. 17th is business. This is supposedly the bypass, Laskin Road. And King Neptune rose from the sea there almost 10 years ago, and they were constructing that statue back in 5. And this is just a wonderful way to begin this journey. And as you see, you're going to go all the way from the beach to the Cumberland Gap. This is what the beach would have looked like, essentially, to the Jamestown settlers as they came up in 1607 in April. Does anybody know where this might be? Yes.
False Cape?
Yes, False Cape State Park. And this was a ride I took down on the tram about 10 years ago from the Sandbridge Beach. And I think a lot of people, if you've never done it, you have to go do that tram ride to go down and see this wonderful state park, to see what we used to look like. And of course, the Jamestown settlers, where the book begins and where the big journey, I think, going across the state from beach to bluegrass, it begins here in 1607 as the English were trying to reach this land of milk and honey, this land of gold. Now, in history class, when I was growing up, we learned that they got out of the boat, they said a little prayer, and they put up a cross, and that was it. It's not what they did. They did a little bit more than that. Making landfall, the crew explored what are now the sandy shores of Cape Henry and Virginia Beach, Virginia, at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. They discovered a paradise that Mr. Percy, he had described in his journal as fair meadows and goodly tall trees with such fresh waters running through the woods. But that same day, the English were ambushed. Mr. Percy, in his diary, wrote, "The savages, creeping on all four from the hills like bears with their bows in their mouth, charged us very desperately in the faces. These savages of the sandhills wounded 2 men, Captain Gabriel Archer and Matthew Morton, a sailor. Obviously, these Chesapeake Indians viewed the foreigners as a threat. For years, the Indians had lived in this coastal area, and now comes these odd-dressed, overdressed, odd-speaking, fanciful strangers who acted like they owned the place. The English fired a musket, and the Indians, according to Mr. Percy, retired into the woods with a great noise and so left us. The next day, the English walked a few miles inland and found a fire where the natives had been roasting oysters. The Indians were gone, having fled away to the mountains," Mr. Percy noted. "So the explorers ate some of the oysters, which were very large and delicate in taste." We had to take a few of their oysters first before we stopped and put the cross up. And obviously, this is not the original cross. This one's made out of concrete. But this is approximately where the Jamestown settlers spent the first 3 days. And before they, went on up to Jamestown, up the James River. We don't really know where they stopped. We think they might have stopped at Fort Story. We think they might have stopped where False Cape is. We think they might have gone into a little inlet that's sealed up now. But somewhere in that vicinity of Cape Henry is where they stopped. That's where I wanted that journey to begin. Because the journey I wanted to describe was starting off with this competition that the English had to get to the west, to that land of milk and honey. And to get over here to the shoreline. It was the same thing. When they landed, it was the same thing about 150 years later when people were trying to go to the west and they were pushing up to this place. This is where Virginia ends. Right there at that little dot under that shelter. That's Kentucky on the far end and Tennessee to the south. This is that very far tip. The only way you can get there, unless you like to climb mountains and scale up rocks, is you have to go into Kentucky on a trail to get to that final point. That's why I wanted to call it Beach to Bluegrass, because you're going from that point where Virginia started in April of 1607 to that final point where Kentucky begins. Kentucky and Cumberland Gap became known as the gateway to the west, just as Cape Henry and the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay became known as the gateway to the New World. One was the Gibraltar of America, one was America's Gibraltar. We had a meteor land in the Chesapeake Bay. We had a meteor land at Middlesboro, just like God was trying to tell us where Virginia should begin and end. This is a Civil War cannon left over from the days when the Cumberland Gap was being guarded as this very important passage, believed to be a very important passage. One park historian told me years ago when I was writing an article for a newspaper, he said, "I think the armies got bored here personally. Nothing really ever happened. They all just kept waiting and waiting and waiting to see what would happen here at the end." Highway 58 is such a diverse road because you have it going from the big cities of Virginia and Virginia Beach and Norfolk and Portsmouth and on to a little bit of Chesapeake, on out into Suffolk, and then you get out to these rolling hills around Brunswick County. You go through little towns like Clarksville. This is Virginia's only lakeside town. But what I wanted to do too was to find these intriguing stories. This is the Cavalier Hotel, built before the Great Depression in 1927 with 500,000 bricks. This marked a brand new chapter in the history of the little fledgling resort known as Virginia Beach, which had been founded in the late 1800s by railroad entrepreneurs who brought the railroad there and had what became the Princess Anne Hotel on the ocean front. The Princess Anne Hotel, unfortunately, burned down, and about 2 decades later, this one came up in its place. And there was nothing in Virginia Beach like it, this fancy place. Something happened here in 1929. There was a man who was on the 6th floor of the Cavalier Hotel. Nobody knows whether he was pushed or whether he fell, but the man's name was Adolph Coors. You might recognize him on Coors Brewery and Coors Beer. Adolph Coors fell to his death. Today they say if you have a wedding at the Cavalier Hotel and you take some pictures, if you look at your pictures very, very closely, you can see this ghostly image of a man. That might be Adolph Coors coming to join your wedding party. Didn't say that he had any beer with him. This is the Francis Land House. When I was a little kid at Arrowhead Elementary School, we learned that Adam Thorogood House was the oldest brick home in North America. This home here, too, was also believed to have been built in 1732 because there was a brick inside the house. It said 1732 on it. But as they've gone back and historians have looked at this a little bit more, they've moved that up a few decades. The same thing with Adam Thorogood, that it's not quite as old as it was. But this is still a very spectacular home. It's about 200 years old, the Francis Land House. And this was part of an estate for a family that used the name Francis Land over and over and over. 5, 6 generations of the family was named Francis Land. This is one of the few landmarks that I looked at on Highway 58 that is actually facing Highway 58. I took a few liberties to get off of the corridor by a mile or two, and at one point 18 miles to find the birthplace of Jeb Stuart in Patrick County, because you're passing through this town as Stuart. But this one is facing right there. When this was acquired by the city of Virginia Beach, the city council thought that this was extravagant to buy this thing. This was once time known as Rose Hall. It was a dress shop. The Virginia Beach City Council voted on buying it. Half the council said yes. The opposing half said paying $735,000 for this house and the surrounding 35 acres was, quote, extremely expensive and a case of excessive spending. Stepping into the fight, Mayor J. Curtis Payne cast the deciding vote, and 11 years later, the Francis Land House opened as a city-owned museum, interpreting the long-lost lifestyle of old Princess Anne County. Long back, before we had a Virginia Beach, when this area was known as Princess Anne County, in the 1690s, and right creeping into the early 1700s, we had a lady in town down in the Pungo area, Muddy Creek, and they said that she was weird as a witch. They said that she could blight your cotton crops, cause your cows to give sour milk. She could even shrink herself. Grace Sherwood could shrink herself so small that she could fit inside of an eggshell. And then she would take this eggshell and scramble across the Atlantic Ocean in a single night. She'd go to England, and she would bring back a batch of rosemary, scrambling back and forth, paddling that little boat, landing there on the beach, and going back down to Pungo. And then she'd plant all that rosemary. People believed all of this. They believed it to the point that this group of women strip searched her and said she had weird as witch markings on her body. Something had to be done about it. And finally, Grace consented to what they wanted to do, this very odd but simple test known as a trial by water, in which her big thumb was tied to her big toe, her other big thumb was tied to her other big toe, and then she was cast into the waters of the Lynnhaven River in 1706. She laughed about it too, because she knew what she was going to do. As soon as she got down in that river, she untied herself, they grabbed her, and they cast her in the county jail. She died in 1740. But people have not forgotten what happened there. There's a little community down in Virginia Beach known as Witch Duck Point. But years ago, when my son, who I dedicated this book to, when he was born in 2006, I had been researching that story some, and I was looking in the newspaper that I write for in Bristol, and I was reading an Associated Press story about Grace Sherwood. I thought, this is weird. Why is this being run in the paper? I was sitting in Bristol, Tennessee in the hospital in July of 2006. 300 years after they threw her in the water. Our then Governor Tim Kaine, now U.S. Senator, had decided to formally exonerate Grace Sherwood and declare her no longer a witch. Not that he ever met her. And today you can still drive down Highway 58 right over Witch Duck Road, which should now properly be known as Exonerated Witch Duck Road. This is a church within just a few steps of where we are right now. And it's the story of what happened to this beautiful town here on the water and what happened to it during the Revolutionary War, because it was anything but beautiful during the Revolutionary War. And I think anybody that knows, it's basically Norfolk History 101. If you know Norfolk history, you're going to know what happened to this town, that there was nothing really left. It was known as Chimney Town because all you had during the Revolutionary War were chimneys popping up out of the rubble. But the point was, you had this church right here, St. Paul's. And this church, the wall, survived. Lord Dunmore had thrown a cannonball, shot a cannonball, and the British troops had shot a cannonball and had cast into the church. Of course, today it's patched up there. They had to put it back up. It fell down in the 1840s and it was put back up with some cement. But there it was, fired January 1st, 1776. This was not the first or last time, this was not the last time that something like this would happen on New Year's Day in Norfolk during a war. January 1st, 1918, we had a huge fire, rash of downtown fires, and broke apart the businesses in downtown Norfolk. The city's soldiers, sailors, and Marines all came out to fight these fires. Water froze on their clothing, icicles hung on their hair, and one fireman was killed when he was caught beneath the burning timbers of the old Monticello Hotel. Estimated property damage was $2 million. The Elizabeth River is one of the rivers that you will cross when you travel across Highway 58. There's a shot there from downtown Norfolk, looking at downtown Norfolk from Portsmouth and on the ferries. This is a scene of a gentleman who is buried over in Portsmouth. This is Commodore James Barron. Commodore James Barron was commanding a ship that got fired on by the British that led to the Embargo Act and eventually led to the War of 1812. He's buried right next to the Commodore Theater. One of the other interesting places you will pass on Highway 58 is Fort Christiana. I'm going to say it all the different ways I've heard it because I don't want to be wrong, so I'll just say it 3 or 4 different ways. But it was named partially for Jesus Christ. This is a fort in Brunswick County, and the wonderful thing about it was the story that goes along with it. The little Indian children in the 1700s, the Native Americans, could come and study inside this fort. The English settlers, the early American settlers, could teach them the 3 R's plus Bible verses. Now that sounded sweet and good and everything else, but the reason we really did it is because just in case somebody wanted to attack us, we could use these little Indian children. They could double as hostages, just in case the fort was attacked. Brunswick County. There we are on Highway 58, the A.L. Philpott Memorial Highway. Brunswick County is the original home of Brunswick stew. Unless you talk to people in Brunswick, Georgia, and they'll say, no, we're the home of Brunswick stew. Brunswick stew got started by a slave cook in 1828 when he took some leftover bread, some leftover vegetables, some squirrel meat, threw it all into a pot for his master, and came up with this plan. This is the Brunswick County Museum in downtown Lawrenceville, which was a stop on the Atlantic and Danville Railway at one time. It was named for a horse, Lawrence. Today, they have this thing that if you get together with the Virginians and the Georgians, they have what is known as the Stew Wars to try to see who has the best stew. One time, everybody was getting together in this Brunswick Stew War, and the Virginians won, and the mayor of Brunswick, Georgia, ran over and stole the trophy because he didn't want to lose. You will also pass here by Buggs Island Lake. If you're in North Carolina, this is John H. Carr Reservoir. It looks like Kerr. Looks like you should say Kerr. The family pronounced it as Carr. We don't call it that because he was from North Carolina. He was a congressman from North Carolina. We want to hold on to the Bug guy. The Bug guy, Samuel Bugg, had his island, Buggs Island. Buggs Island, unfortunately, it gets really confusing when you get out to the lake country of southern Virginia. Buggs Island is not even in the lake. It is below the dam at the headwaters then of Lake Gaston, which only has one name, Lake Gaston. This is a scene of what is below this is Occoneechee Island. And Occoneechee Island was one of the scenes of Bacon's Rebellion before it moved up to the burning of Jamestown. But the Occoneechee Island was actually buried under the water there, and it's submerged now. But you can go to Occoneechee State Park, and they will have these replicas of the Native American dwellings. There's so many great state parks along Highway 58. From Occoneechee to this one right here, this is the Natural Tunnel State Park in Scott County, Virginia, which gets confused a lot with the Natural Bridge up near Lexington, which is just now, if you've read the newspapers, just now beginning to come into the state park system, and that's going to be even more confusing. The reason it's confusing is because for many years this was known as the Natural Bridge of Scott County. Well, people started thinking, well, Natural Bridge, Natural Tunnel, it's all kind of the same. One little old lady, she was 102 years old, she was from Georgia. She called up the state park manager and had her niece do all the talking. She says, my aunt, she wants to come up and see Natural Tunnel one more time. And they said, well, we're not running the chairlift this time here. I said, please, we don't know how long she has to live. Well, they came out, it was November. They'd already put the chairlift away, but they said, you know what, let's just do it. Let's be good stewards. We'll show off the state park for this lady. She may never be back here again. They got everything together, got the whole thing set up. A couple days before they're supposed to show up, the niece called back and said, I'm sorry, but my aunt, she wanted to go to Natural Bridge. I've seen both. You got to go see both. Natural Tunnel is very spectacular. You can also go out to historic Martin Station, which is part of the Wilderness Road State Park, and this is out in Lee County, Virginia. Joseph Martin built this station. This is a replica of his station. He came out from Charlottesville, raced down in the 1770s to build a fort before another group of land prospectors got down there. And he stayed for a few months. The Indians ran him off. He went back the next year. He stayed for another few months. The Indians ran him off. 1780s, he finally got out there again. He was able to stay there long enough. By that time, Daniel Boone had gotten the road done out through the Cumberland Gap in essentially what is a lot of what is now the Route 58 corridor. And he was able to retire to a town that was named for him on Highway 58 named Martinsville. So Martinsville, Joseph Martin went out there. About 10 to 12 years ago, this fort was being built, 2003, and they used only the tools that they would have had on the frontier at the time. So there was no chainsaws, there was nothing electric. They actually had to drop the logs off as they were building this at the state park and bring them in, and they call this the most authentically recreated fort in the United States. Ferrystone State Park. If you wanted, the great story about Ferrystones is the fairy tale. When Jesus Christ died, the fairies that were dancing around the woods began to cry, and their tears turned to stones. And these stones were shaped like crosses. And that's what they look like. Now, the scientists are going to tell you, oh no, the plates were pushing together and the rocks were doing this and all this. I like the fairy tale better. But that is one of the stories that you can find there. And you take the fairy stones and you carry them around. Everybody had them at one time. And to carry these around for good luck. Grayson Highland State Park is another one that you will pass on Highway 58. These are the wild ponies up there. They were put there in 1974 by a man named Bill Pugh. And These wild ponies are much shaggier than what you're going to find up at Chincoteague. And I'm going to say Chincoteague, because I hear that two ways too. But these are kind of like they're living in an inverse environment from the ponies up on the eastern shore. And they're living on what used to be a logging ground, and this was 4,500 feet in elevation up at Grayson Highlands State Park. As you can see, the Appalachian Trail runs through this area too at Wilburn Ridge. This was a volcano at one time. This is right near Mount Rogers, which is the tallest mountain in Virginia, 5,279 feet. A little bit bigger than the mountain that I climbed on when I was a kid growing up in Virginia Beach, which was 66 feet high. And it was a trash dump known as Mount Trashmore. But Mount Rogers, actually it's 5,000, I got that, it's 5,729 feet. 5,729 feet is Mount Rogers. So it's more than a mile high, and there's two ways to get there. You can either go in through Grayson Highlands State Park, 4 miles and then a half-mile spur trail up, or you can come in from White Top Mountain the other way. Both of these are accessible from Highway 58. This is when we're up on White Top Mountain. White Top Mountain is the second highest mountain, and it got its name, a lot of people think, because of the snow, because it's snowy. It actually was originally known as Meadow Mountain, and Meadow Mountain later became known as White Top because it looks white from a distance, that field of grass. Still looking into that's Mount Rogers in the background, still looking from Grayson Highlands State Park and all the wonderful rocks that you'll pass through there on the Appalachian Trail. You can actually see the Appalachian Trail blaze right there. That's going over Wilburn Ridge. This is the trail going right up to Mount Rogers. And when you get up there, it's mossy. Looks like a place where leprechauns would live. And there's your survey marker there at Mount Rogers, the tallest mountain. And again, here's another Appalachian Trail marker. This is at Buzzard Rock, known on top of White Top Mountain, again, right off of Highway 58. And this is known because of the vultures that the people would call buzzards as they went around. Think about Virginia Beach Boulevard, and now look at this scene. Think about how wide Virginia Beach Boulevard is down at the town center, and look at this scene. This is the same road continually going across Virginia. It is so curvy. People say that you will see, you're following your own taillights as you go around the curves. And this is where Grayson County is one of the highest elevation counties in the state. And it's on the Crooked Road Music Trail, Virginia's Heritage Music Trail. When you get out to Stuart, Highway 58 takes on this whole new thing because it goes in mainly for a 2-lane. Has a few patches of 4 lanes, but mainly it becomes a 2-lane at Stuart. And you start to get out with all of this wonderful country music history. When you get out to Scott County, Virginia, you get to the Carter fold, the Carter family fold, A.P., Sarah, and Maybelle. A.P. Carter was married to Sarah. Maybelle was Sarah's cousin and his sister-in-law. His brother Eck married Maybelle. Eck and Maybelle had 3 daughters, one of which was June, who married Johnny Cash. A.P. and Sarah came up with all kinds of great songs with Maybelle, including the Wildwood Flower, Keep on the Sunny Side. And they came out and got discovered on a hot day in July. They came out to Bristol, Tennessee, just below the border, just a few feet below Virginia. And they came out there, and Maybelle was 8 months pregnant. The car had 3 flat tires on a 27-mile ride getting into Bristol. They just kept changing the tires. They brought out a little boy, Joe Carter. He used to sit up here at the Carter family fold at the stage, and he used to make all kinds of animal noises and things on the stage to entertain the people in between the music shows. Joe was this little kid, and his older sister was there, and she fed him ice cream to shut him up, which just gave him a bigger stomach ache, while his parents were in there recording some of the first country music to be recorded and to be called country music. That's why Bristol, where I live today, is known as the birthplace of country music. There were two acts discovered in 1927, that summer. One was the Carter family, who kind of gave country music this homespun melodies. It had made you tell stories. Maybelle took the lead guitar and made the guitar a lead instrument. And you had this other guy who broke up with his band. He came down there too. He was a railroad worker from Mississippi named Jimmy Rogers. He was also discovered in Bristol. And they did not meet there. He was discovered on August 4th, just as they were basically wrapping up the sessions. The Carters recorded 6 songs. He recorded 2. Jimmy, being from Mississippi, was really not much of a way to keep his legacy going. But the Carters, being only about 27 miles down the road, or 3 flat tires away, were down here at the Carter family fold, and the daughter, Jeanette, and the son, Joe, came up with this plan in 1974 to turn the old store that A.P. Carter had just off of 58 again, turn it into a place for music. In 1976, they built a larger barn that is still being used today for Saturday night shows. Just about 99% of all shows have to be acoustic. There's only been a couple of exceptions. Johnny Cash was one of the exceptions. Jeanette Carter, the daughter that I knew, Jeanette, who started the whole thing with, she was the daughter of A.P. and Sarah. She said Johnny Cash was electrified when I met him. So that's why he got to play on stage. Marty Stewart, who was married into the family, he also got to be a good friend of theirs, and part of fundraisers, they also let him play electric. There's Jeanette Carter right there, and she passed on a few years ago. This is A.P. Carter's birthplace. It was an old cabin that's been restored. It was actually fallen down on a farm, on a cattle farm, and it's still on the National Historic Landmarks Register. This is inside my chapter called Johnny and June. This is the house that Johnny and June stayed at when they were in town. When we think of Johnny Cash and June Carter, we think of them living at the house on the lake near Nashville that burned down after one of the Bee Gees bought it. We think of Johnny and June in Jamaica. For 3 weeks a year, they would come out and stay here. This was Maybelle's old home, Maybelle and Eck. If you've seen the Walk the Line movie, Eck was the guy. Maybelle's a pretty big character in the movie. Eck was the guy, when they were all having a family supper, he would not shut up about going fishing. He just kept talking about the fishing rods and the fishing rods. Nobody else was really listening to him, but he kept talking about all kinds of different stuff. But this is where they would come and stay. And after they passed on, it went to John Carter. This is right around the corner, Rye Cove in Scott County, Virginia, just off of 58 again. And what happened here in 1929, May, there was something that looked like a dirty black cloud. Turned out it was a tornado that rolled through the community and hit a school, killed a dozen school children and the teacher, and became the worst tornado tragedy in the history of Virginia for as many fatalities as it occurred. It just came right out of nowhere. And it's not an area that is known for tornadoes out there, though just 3 years ago we had one come right through Glade Spring, right near Emory and Henry College, and cause a lot of devastation there too. And that's another scene of Rye Cove. This is a memorial they've done for the school building out there. And this is the Red Cross cabin that was built after the tornado to solve to help the victims of the tornado. The Carroll County Courthouse in Hillsville, Virginia. There was something that happened that my little son likes to talk about in 1912. He's seen bits and pieces of the Titanic movie. And he seems to be fascinated with 1912, about how horrible it must have been to be on the Titanic. And the Titanic did something with this particular courthouse. Doesn't make any sense. But something happened here a month before the Titanic sank. It started with a kiss and ended with a killing. 5 people lay dead after the trial of Floyd Allen turned into a bullet-flying bloodbath in the Carroll County Courthouse. When the smoke cleared, the dusty street town called Hillsville would be locked in legend and loaded with lore. Talk about a morning after. On March 15, 1912, sleepy Hillsville found its way onto the front pages of newspapers across the nation, with headlines screaming like, "Awful tragedy enacted in a Virginia courthouse." Newspapers remained so entrenched with the story of the Allen clan that for a solid month, journalists filed dispatches about the outlaw Allen family on the run until America's attention turned to the icy Atlantic and the sinking of a ship called the Titanic. Talk about sensationalism. News accounts flew almost as madly as the bullets in the courthouse, whipping up stories in all directions. One said that store owner Floyd Allen tried to kill himself with a pocket knife. Another reported that his runaway brother, J. Sidney Allen, had been surrounded at a stop called Squirrel Spur. Yet one more account said that J. Sidney's wife was killed in a subsequent shootout. Maybe half of those reports were accurate. The story of the post-trial gunfight at J. Sidney's house, the one where his wife was killed, that never happened at all. But talk about ironies, unpretentious Hillsville has not blatantly tried to capitalize on the infamy of this incident, but courthouse tours are offered, and in 2005, would be a counterpart of the Norfolk Historical Society, the Historical Society of Carroll County moved its library into this shooting site where bullet holes can still be seen on a front step of the 1872 courthouse. The funny thing is, and there's nothing really funny about this, but the funny thing is that the whole darn thing started at a church. Started at a church. These boys they were at a corn shucking. And whoever got the red ear of corn, whoever found that, entitled him to kiss the girl of his choice. One of the boys found the red ear of corn. He went up to a girl who had a boyfriend. That boyfriend objected. Those boys got in a fight. It led to something else and something else and something else. And eventually, it ended all the way up until Floyd Allen is standing here and they're getting ready to sentence him to a year in jail. And he said, "I ain't a-going." And nobody knows who fired the first shot, but 57 shots were fired in 90 seconds. And the courthouse is still standing there for you to take tours. The birthplace of country music, this is a big mural on the Bristol, Tennessee side of State Street, which is the street in Virginia and Tennessee that goes right along the state line. Just below the state line is the Grand Guitar in Bristol, Tennessee. And you'll also find the Burger Bar, which is a place that's legendary story is that Hank Williams might have stopped there on his final journey as 1952 became 1953. And of course, he was later declared dead in West Virginia. But some say the Burger Bar was not actually there, though they claim that it was there and that he stopped there. Some, going back to the city directory, I found that the Burger Bar was actually a laundromat at the time, so he probably did not stop there to get a cup of coffee. A lot of firsts and lasts along Highway 58. This is the last capital of the Confederacy, where Jefferson Davis spent a week after the retreat from Richmond. The wreck of the old 97 would have gone down in history as just another train wreck. If people hadn't have gone down to this ravine, started looking at it, and started writing poems and songs, and people started fighting over who wrote the song first, and who recorded it first, and who owns the copyright to this, that, and the other. Everybody wanted to claim that they were the ones who wrote the wreck of the old 97. Today you can go down to Danville and see where you have the story of the cracked cargo cars that flew up with the canaries that flew up out of the wreckage. Again, you're passing over so many great rivers. This is the New River, which runs backwards, as a lot of people like to say. It runs from the south to the north. And this is on a canoe trip with Hungry Mother State Park, right along 58. You'll go right along the edge of it so many times. You'll cross the Holston River 3 times as you go through on Highway 58. You'll pass the north, the south, and the Middle Forks. And you will come close to this scene, which is South Holston Reservoir, South Holston Lake, which is the first of the big Tennessee Valley Authority lakes going on down into the mountains. This is the Clinch River. Clinch River got its name from a hunter named Clinch, though people like to keep repeating the old legend that this Irishman fell out of a raft and he said, "Clinch me, clinch me," and that's how it got its name. Here's Highway 58 crossing over the Clinch River. Again, a lot different than the scenes you'd see around Hampton Roads. There's so many wonderful scenes out in the Southwest Virginia area, and I've been writing about Southwest Virginia for a number of years. The Crooked Road Music Trail, which stretches over 250 miles, will end up at this place. This is off of 58, but this is Breaks Interstate Park, which is known as the Grand Canyon of the South, or the Grand Canyon with clothes on. Breaks Interstate Park is shared by Virginia and Kentucky. It's one of the very few, a handful of these, that are parks that are going into both states. I wrote about this in my first book called Southwest Virginia Crossroads, in which I wrote about the 17 counties southwest of Roanoke. And I wrote the entire book to kind of prove that the state did not stop in Roanoke. This is another scene from Breaks Interstate Park. That is the towers. There's the first book I did. And this is the towers standing up. And this is at the Garden Hole on the front cover. The Garden Hole is a takeoff point for the whitewater rafters. And the whitewater rafting is very serious through there. You're going into class 4, 5, and some say 6, which is as high as you can go in the Breaks Gorge. Another scene that I wrote about in my Southwest Virginia Crossroads book was Draper's Valley, which is over in the Pulaski County area. And more recently, I wrote a book called Washington County, Virginia, Then and Now, and I wrote about a little place here called Goose Pimple Junction. Goose Pimple Junction, Virginia, population 154. Looks like something off a hee-haw, doesn't it? This is in Washington County, Virginia, not far from Highway 58, not far from Bristol. And they used to say that the only way you could count the population of Goose Pimple Junction is you would stand at that sign as this gentleman is, and you'd count all the houses that you would see from the sign, try to figure out who lives in those houses, and then you write it down. That's the population of Goose Pimple Junction. Now, the other thing about Goose Pimple Junction, how did it get its name? Well, there was a couple fighting, cussing, carrying on over there up on a hill, and one guy said, you know, it gives me goose pimples to hear them yelling and screaming, and that's how it got its name, Goose Pimple Junction. There's Washington County, Virginia, my latest book that I did with the Historical Society of Washington County, Virginia, and that is the Virginia Creeper Trail on the cover. It's kind of a then and now scene showing of what the Virginia-Carolina Railway at the bottom and what it looks like today. It is also a place and a stop that I call the Creeper Country in my Beach to Bluegrass Highway 58 book. I rode the Creeper Trail last week. The great thing about the Virginia Creeper Trail is you get up, they will take you on a shuttle from Damascus, Virginia, and take you up to White Top Station, and then it's your job to pedal 17 miles. But don't get too intimidated because it's downhill the entire way. It does not go uphill at all for the 17 miles till you get back over to the shuttles. And it is quite an excursion. You'll pass by the waterfalls here on White Top Laurel Creek. Waterfalls can be found all along Highway 58. This is the Peach Bottom Falls outside of Independence, also known as the Powerhouse Falls. This is a scene right off of 58 from my Washington County book. This is Damascus, as the town where the Appalachian Trail will go right through the town. This is known as the friendliest town on the trail. And they have the Trail Days Festival. That's what it looks like today. There's Damascus many, many years ago, about a century ago. You'll also pass right over the Appalachian Trail. The Appalachian Trail cuts right across Highway 58 in Damascus. And this was actually, this part of the Appalachian Trail, this was a park at one time, and there was a railroad depot there to the left, right off of what was Norfolk Southern's Abingdon branch. It was became part of Norfolk Southern later, but it was, when it closed, it was still part of Norfolk and Western Railway, the Abingdon branch. This was a Boy Scouts, Eagle Scout project to build that sign. You go through Metazodan, Virginia on Route 58, and you'll come across this little thing. This is Metazodan's Little Lighthouse. This was built at a tourist attraction. It was built when a man had a Circle M Zoo, and he had monkeys on an island out here, and you would ride around in a paddle wheeler boat at Metazodan in the 60s, and you'd have this little lighthouse. Looks sort of like a lighthouse, but it's 300 miles away from the Atlantic Ocean. Mayberry Mill could have been called Mayberry Mill. There was a man who was a Mayberry, got tired of being a Mayberry. He was a Mayberry, got tired of being Mayberry. He shortened his name to Mayberry, and it became the Mayberry Mill. The Mayberry Mill A monkey with a camera could shoot a scene like this. Anybody can shoot a picture of the Mabry Mill. It's just drop dead gorgeous. It was made to be that way. The Mabrys, Ed and Lizzie, they had a house there. But when the Blue Ridge Parkway landscape architects got out there and they were getting that Blue Ridge Parkway done, all 469 miles, crossing over at Route 58 right there at Metazodan, they saw that house that Ed and Lizzie lived in. They said, they're not going to live there anymore. They're going to live in the log cabin that we're moving to the site, and that was where they grew. That was where they lived when they ran their mill. That's the story that you have out there today. Little false. But right down the road, you have the Mayberry Trading Post. Sort of again, Mayberry. This is where the regular Mayberrys stayed after the Mabrys broke off and became kind of a different branch of the family. This also is not too far from Mount Airy, North Carolina. Of course, we all know who is buried off of Roanoke Island. We all know who came from Mount Airy, North Carolina, Andy Griffith. Because we all know what Mayberry is supposed to be. But why is Mayberry here? The story goes is that Andy Griffith's grandfathers would come up to sell ginseng roots at the old Mayberry Trading Post. And when the producers came out and started looking for names to get into that series, looking at all the street names around Mount Airy, they also kind of looked on the map and said, here's a Mayberry right over in Virginia. Why don't we name the town Mayberry? And that's how it got its name. We have covered bridges right along Highway 58. These are in Patrick County. This is Lover's Leap, right off of the road. This is a mountain that you will be climbing if you go from Stewart on over to Hillsville towards the Blue Ridge Parkway. You're going to be climbing up over this as you're climbing up onto parts of the Blue Ridge at that point. But I found in working on this book and traveling down Highway 58 to Natural Tunnel and White Top Mountain and this place, I found there were so many Lover's Leaps, maybe Virginia's state motto should have been called, Virginia is for leaping lovers. There's another scene. VDOT doesn't like this, but that's a tradition of everybody signing their names in the graffiti down below there. The Moonlight Theater is one of a handful of drive-ins in the state. There's only about 10, if that, anymore. The Moonlight is currently not open. You can see it from Highway 58. When Highway 58 leaves Damascus, it goes up to a little town called Abingdon. Takes a turn, and then it does one thing. It gets on Interstate 81. This is the only time that it will do this across the whole state, is when it will actually get on an interstate. It will travel from exit 19 to exit 1, 18 miles. And since I live in the area, we usually say it goes from the Cracker Barrel to the mall. Moonlight Theater is just about in the middle of it, and it was built in 1949. It's on the Virginia Landmarks Register. If you know anything about drive-in movie theaters, recently there has been a big controversy and a big change in the industry to move to digital and not use the film anymore. So this, unfortunately, has not been one of the theaters that has moved to the digital conversion so they can get the new movies and stay in business. So right now it's kind of in limbo, but it is a scene that you can see right off of it. Highway 58, before there was a Interstate 81, was going right down US 19 and US 11 and would have passed by this place between Bristol and Abingdon. It was known as the Robert E. Lee Motel. It was torn down a few years ago. This is a postcard from the old place. It's another scene I put in my Washington County, Virginia book. They tore down the hotel, but they saved the sign. The sign was just so good. This is now at a storage unit over in just across the street. So you can rent that storage block and look up at Robert E. Lee. But you can't stay there unless you want to sleep in your own storage unit. As I said, I got off the road just a little bit to find Jeb Stuart. Jeb Stuart was born in a little town called Ararat, just above Mount Airy, North Carolina in Patrick County, and you will pass through a town that was known as Taylorsville at one time, is now known as Stuart. When the railroad came through there, they renamed it. And he was born down at Laurel Hill, which is a historic site, and they have a lot of Civil War reenactments. That's a scene I shot about a year ago. And now we get here. Why is Douglas MacArthur here? You know, his mother had a lot of ties to this area. this became, being a military child, this kind of became the place where he would go, was Norfolk. And there's a tale that's told that when he was a young boy, 13, he was a newspaper boy here in the streets of Norfolk. But as he was a newspaper boy, he went out one day and he came back home and hadn't sold any newspapers. And his mother said, "Doug, what's wrong?" He says, "The other boys won't let me sell any newspapers." And she says, "Doug, you're not a quitter. I want you to go out there, I want you to do it right, sell your newspapers tomorrow." So the next day he came back, he sold every single newspaper. He also came back with torn up face and torn up knuckles and ripped up clothes. He fought all the other boys to sell his newspapers. I kind of like to think that the man that's here helped us win World War II because he was such a great, hard-fighting newspaper boy on the streets of Norfolk. This is one of the cannons that is pointing at downtown Martinsville. It's a little intimidating. This cannon was brought here to the Henry County Courthouse that lay in the mud, and they couldn't move it until the circus came to town. And one story goes is that they enlisted the circus elephants to move these cannons through the mud, and today they point from the old Henry County Courthouse to uptown Martinsville. They don't call it downtown because it's up on a hill. It's uptown Martinsville. That's the Henry County Courthouse. This used to be a church built in 1830 to 1832. This used to be a church. It was known as an opera house. It is now the State Theater of Virginia, the Barter Theater. And that is what it looks like today. I live about 10 miles from the Barter Theater. And the Barter Theater got its start back in the Great Depression in 1933. There was a man named Robert Porterfield who was an actor. He was born in Austinville, Virginia. Austinville is where Stephen Austin, the father of Texas, was also born. Well, Robert Porterfield, he grew up in Saltville, Virginia. Saltville, Virginia, Jeb Stuart's wife went there after Jeb Stuart lost his life. Well, then he left, went to New York, came back home in the Great Depression with a bunch of his buddies, came to this little steel town of Abingdon with a whole bunch of wild and hairy guys and some girls, some women who caused all kinds of controversy because they were walking around the streets smoking cigarettes. But he said, we got a plan. Everybody out here, all you farmers have got all kinds of vegetables, I bet. You can't sell them. They said, that's right. I said, well, why don't we, what we know how to do? We know how to put on some shows. We're going to take this old church, this old opera house, this old Sons of Temperance Hall. We're going to take that old building, what used to be the town hall, and we're going to put on some shows. And they also were using the old Stonewall Jackson College in town. And eventually that became part of the dormitories for these actors. And they said, well, how do we get in? We don't have any money. And they said, just bring whatever you got. And they brought whatever they could find. They brought all kinds of, the first guy got there with a pig. And they grabbed the pig and they just tied it up and let it oink and squeal and everything. And they tied it up outside like a barker, try to get some attention. Some people would grow an extra row of beans in their garden and say, well, that was for the barter. And then we'll take our beans and we go in there and see our show. Ladies would come in with cottage cheese. They'd come in with tomatoes. They'd come in, one man came in with a cow. Came up to Main Street with his cow. And he milked it. And he had this glass with him and he brought it up to the little girl at the ticket booth. And she said, okay, now, let me see. So this is just enough milk for you to get a seat. That's good. And G7, that's where you're going to sit. G7, G8 is open. Is that your wife over there by the cow, your cow that you just milked? Is she coming into you? Want me to say G8 for her?
Honey, no, now she's going to have to milk her own ticket.
And it went on like that night after night. Turtles got loose in the lobby. One man came in with a calf, but he was too cheap to give up the rope that it was tied to, so they just let the calf run in, and showtime was delayed for 5 minutes. But one of the things that they tried to do was to use all kinds of publicity. So they put up this sign that said, "Slow, the actors are crossing across the road here on Main Street." Here's old Route 58, what was then Route 11. But there's Mr. Porterfield there on the right with a couple of the actors. And all kinds of actors went through this place. Ernest Borgnine, Kevin Spacey, Frances Fisher, who was the mother, again, Titanic, she was the mother in the Titanic. You had Gregory Peck, Ernest Borgnine, Larry Linville, Frank Burns from MASH was also there. So there was tons of people that have passed through the Barter Theater, and it's still going on today. The story of going across Highway 58, following that southern border of Virginia, is really following a state line. It's following from one side of Virginia to the other. And how did our state line get there? Colonel William Byrd II, he got out through the Dismal Swamp. You know, he called a vast body of mire and nastiness unfit for respiration. We should drain the whole darn thing. Turned it into a farm. George Washington agreed. You remember George Washington wanted to come up, grow rice in the Great Dismal Swamp. He also wanted to drain it. All these guys, the adventurers for draining the Great Dismal Swamp, somehow they pushed through the Dismal Swamp. That's the most miraculous part to me, that they pushed through there to get a state line marked. And from beyond that swamp, anything had to be easy after that, right? They kept going out to these hills. Colonel William Byrd II, he quit when he got up to the Blue Ridge. Peter Jefferson, with some others, Peter Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson's daddy, moved on. He got out there with a new survey. He picked up where Mr. Byrd left off, and he went all the way over to something called Steep Rock. And he stopped. It's right on that point there, right in that right-hand corner in this map. Right below where it says Meadow Mountain. Meadow Mountain, the same as White Top Mountain that we looked at a few minutes ago. When Peter Jefferson got there at Steep Rock, he said, "That's it. That's as far west as any white man would ever go. The rest is all going to be to the Indians, the Native Americans, whatever." Well, that, of course, 30 years later, people started going out there. One was Richard Henderson, one was Thomas Walker. These guys were looking at the state lines for North Carolina and Virginia. All of this area out here on the left, the bottom left, is now Tennessee. But for many years, it was North Carolina. Couldn't figure out where the state line was going to go. They couldn't figure out where Steep Rock was. These timbers that they had marked with these notches, these things had died off and there was no mark. They couldn't figure out anything. So they had to just start finding new places to start marching. And they started going out to the west. So they were just below here of White Top Mountain, which of course gives you this view of where North Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee come together. As they started going out to the west, eventually they had to figure out where would the state line go. For a while, the state line goes up, over, and back down again. It was what's known as the offset. 15 square miles of Virginia ended up in what is now Johnson County, Tennessee, and Sullivan County, Tennessee. How did that happen? One said that there was a woman who gave favors to the surveyors to alter the boundary. One story said that the moonshiners were too drunk to draw, they were drinking moonshine, they're too drunk to draw a straight line. The iron ore deposits interfered with the compass readings. They drew the line around the moonshine stills to keep the stills inside North Carolina. There's all kinds of stories. Mainly, the thing is that were 4 more lines drawn over the course of a century, and that's how this confusion got there. But they really had to figure out what was going on when they got to this place here. Because here we are on what used to be known more commonly as Mud Street, because it was full of mud. But officially, this was known as Main Street. Today, it's known as State Street. Tennessee on the right, Virginia on the left. And in 1881, in this town, 400 miles west of Norfolk, they had this plan. And they said, "We'll put the state line right down the middle of the road." They shook hands on it. 1889, they got out there again and they said, "We got to put in a water line." Okay. "I'm going to put the water line right here." Well, who owns the water line right there? They said, "Well, I do." "Well, we do." "Tennessee does." "No, Virginia does." Because the line's there. They started getting so mad that the guys from Virginia and the guys from Tennessee got in the middle of this road with guns in them on a ditch. They were getting ready to shoot each other over this water line. Thankfully, one guy fell in the mud, another guy fell in the mud. Everybody started to laugh, and Bristol's Waterworks War went away. But still, they had to finally figure out where in the world is the state line, because they had just all this confusion over all these years. It went right into the early years of the 1900s, of the 20th century. Had to take the Supreme Court to finally decide, where will Tennessee and Virginia be separated? They heard all kinds of testimony, including a statement from an elderly woman, and she said, "Don't be moving that state line now, honey." And I said, "Well, why is that, ma'am?" She says, "Because I've always lived in Tennessee, and you move that state line, I'm going to put my house in Virginia." And I said, "Well, ma'am, honey, I mean, your house is still going to be in the same spot." And she just stood there shaking her head. She says, "Oh, no, honey, I've always heard the climate was milder in Tennessee." The story of the Border Bash in my Beach to Bluegrass book kind of inspired me to look a little bit more into the county that's just below Bristol, and that's where I did this book here, Sullivan County. Sullivan County is Sullivan County, Tennessee, but half of this county was Virginia at one time. This was the state line. Today, this is Boone Lake. This is a dam on the Holston River. Where the little boys are is Old North Carolina. Where those guys are on the other side, on that far bank, that was Virginia. When you cross that river, because they had no idea where that state line was, they were using that state line for several years as the boundary. And from there, I did another little book, a fun little book called Finding Franklin, Mystery of the Lost State Capital. There was a lot of confusion over what was, before Tennessee was formed, for briefly it was known as a state known for Benjamin Franklin. And 100 years after it was a state, the Capitol building mysteriously disappeared on a trip to Nashville. And I wrote this book as a fun little fiction lark. A lot of younger readers like it. And it does have one chapter that comes to Franklin, Virginia. A lot of it takes place in Tennessee, but at one point the characters do get lost on Highway 58. I had to throw that in there. The Marble and Other Ghost Tales of Tennessee and Virginia is a book that I did as a branch of Beach to Bluegrass. And one of my favorite stories of this one was the story of the ghost that smoked cigarettes at the A.P. Baldwin Gymnasium. A.P. Baldwin was a school principal for 33 years at this school. He smoked so many cigarettes, he had a hard time climbing up the stairs. His hands would turn yellow from smoking all these cigarettes. He got out here to this school in Russell County, Virginia. The funny thing is, if you've ever traveled in Southwest Virginia and you want to talk about Highway 58, this is the strange thing. What I wrote about in Beach to Bluegrass, the 507 miles, is the bottom part of 58. There's a whole different confusing thing at Abingdon in which there is another 58, 58A. And a lot of people, and that will go through St. Paul and Castlewood over to Norton, Big Stone Gap, down to Pennington Gap, and eventually to Jonesville. So there's two 58s out there, and at one point they're as many as 45 miles away from each other on other sides of these mountains. This Highway 58A will go through Russell County, Virginia, close to this little town called Honaker. And when Mr. Baldwin here, who this gymnasium was named for, when he died in 1981, the ghost stories began. People started saying they could see these red tips of lit cigarettes up in the A.P. Baldwin Gymnasium. Finally, there was a night in the 1990s when two teachers and a couple of students went into the gym just after baseball practice, just after 7:30. All the lights were off except for one light that stayed up here, and it started flicking and it turned blood red. Next came something of a sighting up in the balcony, and what looked like this silhouette, looked like this man wearing a trench coat. He was real tall, one of the teachers said. And what you could see coming out of his mouth? The glow of a cigarette. You could see that little red glow. The teacher said that the silhouette then went from one end of the batting cage all the way to the other, almost in an instant. Now the students, they screamed and ran out of the gym. The teachers tiptoed up to that balcony. One of the teachers said that he found ashes on the floor where the smoking apparition had stood. To this day, nobody can explain why they see these things, but people say that they still see these red tips of lit cigarettes, usually around dusk, right around 9 o'clock in the summertime, at the A.P. Baldwin Gymnasium, and they say that is the sign of the principal who never left school. This is the Reynolds homestead where Abram Reynolds grew up. R.J. Reynolds grew up. This is just off of 58 in Patrick County. This is a historic site that's owned by Virginia Tech, and it's a focus of the last chapter of a book I did called Haunts of Virginia's Blue Ridge Highlands. It's also a focus of a chapter that I did on Beach to Bluegrass. As I did Haunts of Virginia's Blue Ridge Highlands, this book grew out of Beach to Bluegrass and the fact that I had done a little ghost tale book. And people began to start telling me all these ghost tales. So here I was out traveling around at shows and things and book fairs and festivals and stuff, and people said, have you heard about this place? Have you heard about the man that used to make whiskey in this bed and breakfast? And they said that he used to settle down in his rocking chair up in Woolwine. And I said, no. And I said, have you heard about this place here, which is on the cover? And this is up in Salem, where a woman woke up and a ghost was supposed to be thrown. She was an attorney from Nashville and said that this ghost was throwing a sheet on her. She screamed at the ghost screamed right back at her. This is the Great Dismal Swamp. And the Great Dismal Swamp has that wonderful lake out in the middle of it. The Great Dismal Swamp used to be twice what it is today. Of course, so much of it's been drained for the developments in this area. The Lake Drummond, 3,100 acres, is much bigger than the other natural freshwater lake in Virginia, which is Mountain Lake up in Giles County, Virginia. Here we have the story of the ghostly Lady of the Lake, who goes back and forth with her lover in her canoe, and she's canoe is powered by, they have a little lamp that's powered by fireflies. And of course the scientists say this is foxfire and some of the other explanations and the gases and stuff that's coming up, but some of us like the stories and go with that. Dismal Town and the Great Dismal Swamp. A lot of people talk about what was the first place named for George Washington, how many places are named for George Washington. Where I live in Washington County, Virginia, there used to be this big claim that that was the first place named for George Washington, or the first county. Then they found out, no, there was another county named for it before that. And I said, well, have you ever been over to the Great Dismal Swamp? And that's what I'm showing you now. This is the Washington Ditch. I said, you got to find the Washington Ditch before you go to the county. This is the Lake Drummond. This is Mountain Lake. If you're a Dirty Dancing fan, you will recognize a lot of scenes from right here. This is a big chapter in my Haunts of Virginia's Blue Ridge Highlands book. This is a lake that when Christopher Gist, or Gist, pronounced two different ways, when he went up there in the 1700s, he told all of everyone else as an explorer, he said, I have found this, what is now behind Virginia Tech on a mountain. He said, I have found this magical pool of water. Well, 20 years later, people went back up and they said, what are you talking about? There's like a little pond up there, maybe, you know. This is a lake that's on an earthquake. Shake this lake and go back and forth. It's up on a fault. It comes and goes and comes and goes. It became a resort back in the 1850s. This is the Virginia Cabin, and in Dirty Dancing, this was the home where Baby Houseman stayed. This is the beach that was in the scenes. This ballast and this chain and these poles here were actually constructed for the movie. Patrick Swayze, I believe, or one of the other characters, tripped over this as they're walking up the hill onto the kitchen scene. Of course, they could never do a sequel to this movie today because, look, the lake is down so far. It's coming and going and coming and going. One of the stories in my Haunts of Virginia's Blue Ridge Highlands book is the story of the lady whose father built that hotel, and today they say that she is haunting the place. One of the stories in my Beach to Bluegrass book is about this, the Berry Hill Plantation, another place you will pass not far from on Highway 58 in South Boston. And they have claimed that there's ghosts and stuff there all the time. But to wrap up tonight, I want to tell you a little story again about Abingdon. And this is a house. This started as that looks like more than a house. This was singularly a house for Francis Preston and his wife, Sarah. Sarah came from good stock. Her uncle was none other than Patrick Henry. Her daddy was General William Campbell, who led the Battle of Over Mountain Men down to Kings Mountain. He led the down to the defeat of the British, one of the turning points of the American Revolution. This later became the Martha Washington College for Women in Abingdon. Just across the street is the Barter Theater, the State Theater of Virginia. And when it was the Martha Washington College for Women, it looked like this. And this was kind of in the, just after the Civil War. It started at the Civil War in 1860, just a year before the Civil War started, is when it became the college. And there's all kinds of stories that are related to this place. Bill Clinton has stayed here, Elizabeth Taylor has stayed here, Jimmy Carter has stayed at this place. But the story of the person that people talk about the most is not the person who stayed there, but it's the name of the girl that everyone wants to talk about, and her name is Beth. Beth was a student at the Martha Washington when it was a college. And when it was a college and the Civil War came in, as you can see, it's added on a lot since then when it became the Martha Washington Hotel today. She had a boyfriend who was a Yankee. She, of course, being a fine Southern girl, she fell in love, and she wanted to take care of her Yankee sweetheart, as the girls would say many years later. And she had a violin, and she would play this violin to soothe her Union soldier sweetheart. And one night, the man said, "Play something, Beth, I'm going to die." So she began to play her violin. He died, and later she died, a victim of typhoid fever. Today they say if you go to the Martha Washington Inn, what used to be the Martha Washington College, and you go there on a full moon night, you can still hear her playing that violin. One time there was a man who said, I've heard your musical ghost. And the night auditor looked at him. This was in the middle of the night. She said, "Sir, I'm sorry. You've heard what?" He said, "I've heard your musical ghost. This ghost that you've got in your brochure. I've read about it. I've heard about it. I am hearing it." And they said, "Sir, that's just something in the brochure. Everything's going to be fine. Would you like a glass of water or anything?" He says, "Yeah, I have heard." And he insisted. So the night auditor went upstairs, and the housekeeper went upstairs, and they had a bellhop still on duty, and they went on up, and they're all standing outside this man's room. And they're listening, and they're hearing nothing. Nothing. The man's just looking at them, and they're all kind of looking at each other and thinking, well, we got to be polite. Then they heard it, this faint sound of a violin. And they all started looking at each other. And like, oh my gosh, maybe there is a ghost here. And then the night auditor ran back downstairs and discovered that the man who called and went downstairs to say there was a musical ghost was in this room. And in this room was a concert violinist scheduled to play later that night at Emory and Henry College.